My Parasite sister-in-law had no idea I was the CEO at the company she works for. I always kept a simple life. One day, she threw a Gatsby-like party for our family and friends. I wanted to see how they'd treat a poor person. They bragged and made jokes until a Bentley arrived and the man said my name. She dropped her glass. My name is Elena Whitfield. That's the name on the deed to my house, the name on my company's letterhead, and the name 11 years ago I put on the door of a 2-desk office above a tire shop in Charlotte, North Carolina, when Whitfield Logistics was nothing but a laptop, a fax machine nobody used, and $40,000 of my own savings. It is not the name my husband's family knows me by. To them, I am Lena Callahan, Daniel's quiet wife, the one who does something with spreadsheets from the guest bedroom we call an office. Nobody in that family has ever asked what the something is. Nobody has ever asked because nobody has ever needed to. That's the arrangement I built on purpose, one careful year at a time, and on the night of Vanessa's party, it very nearly cost me everything to keep it. The invitation came on heavy cream cardstock, gold foil lettering, a tiny sketch of a champagne coupe in the corner. Vanessa Callahan, my sister-in-law, Daniel's younger sister, was throwing herself an engagement/promotion party at the Ashworth estate, a rented vineyard property 20 minutes outside the city, with a ballroom that seats 200 and a fountain out front that costs, I would later learn, $4,000 a night just to run. Quick pause before we continue. I'm Clara, the woman behind this channel. I write these stories because I love that little moment when strangers from different places end up feeling the same thing. If this one already pulled you in, stay with me. It goes deeper from here. A rented vineyard property 20 minutes outside the city, with a ballroom that seats 200 and a fountain out front that costs, I would later learn, $4,000 a night just to run. She'd gotten engaged to a man named Trent, who sold boat insurance and talked about it like he'd cured a disease. She'd also just been promoted to regional accounts coordinator at a logistics company, my logistics company. A promotion she credited loudly and often to finally being taken seriously by people who matter. I already knew about the promotion. I'd approved it 8 weeks earlier, in a stack of 40 other personnel changes under my legal name, the one that means something inside those walls and nothing at all inside this family. Daniel found me in our bedroom that Saturday evening, holding up 2 dresses like I was choosing between them, though we both knew which one I'd pick. The navy one. Plain, knee-length, the kind of dress that disappears in a room. You don't have to go all out, he said, which was his way of saying, please don't embarrass anyone tonight, and I told him I wasn't planning to. I was planning the opposite. I wanted to walk into that ballroom in flats and a cardigan I'd owned since business school, and watch, just once, how a room full of people who called themselves family would treat me if they believed the version of me they'd already decided on. Daniel knew what I was. He'd known since our 3rd date, when I told him about the tire shop office over gas station coffee, and he asked if he could see it. He never told his family, not because I asked him to keep a secret, but because I asked him to let me have one ordinary space in my life where nobody wanted anything from me. He'd kept that promise for 11 years. That night, I could see it costing him. We arrived at 7. Valets in white gloves, a string quartet warming up near the fountain, actual ice sculptures. 2 of them, swans, already sweating in the July heat. Vanessa met us at the top of the steps, in a dress that probably cost more than my first month of payroll, and she looked at what I was wearing the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth right before company arrives. Oh, Lena, she said, loud enough for the 2 women behind her to hear. You know it's black tie optional, not black cardigan mandatory. The women laughed. Daniel's hand found the small of my back, a warning, a comfort, I couldn't tell which. I smiled and said the cardigan had pockets, which was true, and Vanessa rolled her eyes like I'd confirmed something she'd always suspected. Inside, the ballroom was full of people I mostly didn't know. Trent's boat insurance colleagues, Vanessa's book club, a cluster of country club friends who all seemed to already know each other's children's private school tuition down to the dollar. I found a spot near the bar, ordered a club soda, and let the party happen around me without asking me to join it. That was the plan. Watch. Don't perform. Just once, see the shape of things without my title standing in front of me like a shield. It didn't take long. A woman named Cordelia, Trent's cousin, cornered me by the shrimp tower and asked what I did all day, in the specific tone people use when they've already decided the answer is nothing. I told her I managed a household budget, which again was true, if only in fragments. She nodded slowly. The practiced nod adults give a child's drawing and drifted off to find someone more interesting. A few minutes later, a man I didn't recognize, one of Trent's insurance colleagues, asked Daniel in front of me whether Elena had ever thought about getting some kind of part-time work. Now that they're kids, we don't have kids. But he didn't wait to find that out. We're probably old enough for her to have a little more time on her hands. Daniel opened his mouth to answer, and I answered first, easily, tossing the words out like a small stone I didn't mind losing. I keep busy, I said. The man gave me the smile you give someone you've already stopped listening to, and turned back to Daniel to ask about the Panthers game instead. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten. I put my hand on his arm, just for a second, the way you'd steady a table that was about to wobble. 15 minutes later, I overheard Vanessa telling a group by the Ice Swans that she'd basically built her department from scratch. That upper management had finally noticed real talent instead of nepotism, and that her fiancé's insurance book was closing in on Daniel's little sister status. She actually said that, like it was a title she was racing him for. Someone asked whether Daniel's wife worked. Vanessa's laugh carried across half the tent. Lena? She helps out at home. It's sweet, honestly. Not everyone needs a career to feel important. Trent added something about how some women just aren't built for the pressure. And the group around them murmured the kind of agreement that isn't really agreement, just politeness dressed up as one. I stood there with my club soda and did the math I'm good at doing quietly. This tent, this quartet, these two ice swans, the catering trays being refreshed every 20 minutes by a staff of at least 15. None of it was cheap, and Vanessa's salary, the one I'd approved 8 weeks earlier, did not stretch this far. I did a rough estimate in my head, the kind of estimate 11 years of signing checks trains you to do without meaning to. The venue alone ran close to $18,000 for the night, before liquor, before the quartet, before the swans that some catering company had to truck in on dry ice. Somewhere in that gap was a number I didn't have yet, and something about the shape of it snagged in my mind like a receipt left too long in a coat pocket. I filed the thought away quietly, without a face, for later. Around 8, Judith cornered me near the dessert table and told me, not unkindly, but not kindly either, that she worried about Daniel carrying the whole household on his shoulders. And wasn't it about time I found something to occupy myself with? Now that I was, she paused, choosing the word like she was picking a piece of fruit, settled. I told her I stayed plenty occupied. She patted my arm like you'd pat a dog that had done something almost right, and moved off toward the bar, and I let her go without correcting a single word of it. At 8:30, Judith, Daniel's mother, clinked a spoon against a glass and made a toast about her daughter's hard-earned success. And everyone raised their flutes. And I raised my club soda an inch, and Vanessa caught my eye over the rim of her glass and smiled the kind of smile that has teeth in it even when the mouth is closed. At 8:41, my phone buzzed once against my hip. A text from Marcus Reyes, my chief of staff. 3 words long, confirmed for Monday. I didn't know yet exactly what he meant by it. I'd asked him earlier that week to pull together a file on a personnel matter I'd been putting off, something HR had flagged twice already, and I hadn't looked closely enough to connect the name on that file to the woman currently toasting herself under a rented tent 20 minutes from my house. I slipped the phone back into my cardigan pocket, the one Vanessa had made fun of an hour earlier, And I had no idea yet how much that pocket and that phone and that 3-word text were about to matter before the night was over. By 9 o'clock, the party had loosened up, the toast over, the second round of drinks already settling in. The quartet gave way to a DJ. The ice swans had started to sag at the wingtips. And the jokes about me, which had started as small sideways comments, began to arrive head-on. It started at the valet stand. Or rather, it started with the valet stand as the excuse. Trent's brother-in-law, a broad man named Craig, who sold something involving pools, had gone out to check on his car and came back laughing so hard he had to explain himself twice. "You guys drive a Honda," he announced to the group, to Daniel specifically, like he'd discovered oil in the backyard. A Honda Civic, in this parking lot, between a 911 and a Range Rover. Vanessa, drifting past with a fresh glass of champagne, didn't miss the opening. "That's Lena's car," she said. "Practical. She likes practical." She said the word practical the way other people say cheap, and the group laughed, and Daniel's hand found my back again, and I smiled and said the Civic had 200,000 miles on it and had never once let me down, which was true, and which nobody in that circle heard as anything but confirmation of exactly what they already believed. I want to be clear about something, because I've turned this night over enough times to know how it can sound. I wasn't hurt because they thought I drove an old Honda. I drive an old Honda because I choose to. The car in our garage that actually costs something is Daniel's truck, which he needs for work, and even that isn't much to look at. I wasn't hurt because they thought I didn't have money. What sat wrong, low in my stomach, sharp enough that I had to set my club soda down twice just to steady my hand, was the specific pleasure they took in believing it, the eagerness. Like my smallness, made their evening make more sense. Craig wasn't finished. He waved over 2 more people, a woman from Vanessa's book club and her husband, a dentist, both of them already a little pink from the open bar, and made them guess what Daniel and I did for a living. Like it was a party game with a punchline everyone already knew. "Municipal something?" the dentist guessed. "Insurance adjuster?" his wife tried. Craig shook his head, delighted, and said, "Nope. Nothing. She's home. He fixes trucks." Daniel does, in fact, run fleet maintenance for a regional carrier, which is skilled, essential work that keeps 18-wheelers legal and safe on the interstate. And Craig said it like it was something you'd apologize for at a dinner party. I watched Daniel's ears go red at the tips, a sure sign he was swallowing something he wanted to say. And I laced my fingers through his and squeezed once, which was the only correction I let myself make out loud that whole night. The dentist's wife looked at me with the specific, performative sympathy people reserve for someone they've just placed several rungs beneath them. "It must be nice, though," she said, "not having to worry about all that, just staying home." I told her it had its moments, and she nodded like she'd confirmed a theory. And the group drifted toward the bar for another round, already forgetting me as easily as they'd forget a chair they'd just gotten up from. Vanessa found me again near 10, this time without an audience, which surprised me until I understood why. She wanted to show me something privately, the way you save your best card for the person you most want to lose to. "Can I tell you something?" she said, and didn't wait for an answer. She pulled out her phone and held it up, angled just enough that I could see the screen, but not close enough to actually read it. A habit, I realized later, of someone who wants you to see the shape of a thing, not the substance. It was an email, her company email. Subject line, something about a Q2 client retention spot bonus. A dollar figure sat under the subject line in bold. 4 figures, she said, tapping the screen with a manicured nail like she was pointing at a trophy. For exceptional relationship management. Corporate doesn't just hand that out, Lena. You have to earn it. She said corporate with the reverence people reserve for a name they've never met but admire from a distance. And I felt something cold and very specific click into place behind my ribs, because I had, in fact, signed off on that exact bonus program 9 days earlier. Not her bonus individually. I don't see individual names in a batch of 400. But the program itself, The retention initiative, the dollar ceiling per employee, all of it had come across my desk with my signature at the bottom of the memo. E. Whitfield, sitting 3 feet away from the woman holding it up like a diamond, and she had no idea whose hand had put it there. That's wonderful, I told her, and meant it in a way she couldn't possibly have understood. You should be proud. I am, she said, already looking past me for someone else to show. Some of us actually build something. I let her walk away. I stood by the dessert table a moment longer, next to a 3-tier cake none of us would eat because the party wasn't really about the cake. And I did something I don't usually let myself do in a social setting. I pulled up my own phone, quickly. The screen brightness turned low and opened the messaging app where Marcus and I keep a running thread for things that can't wait until Monday. His 3-word text from earlier, confirmed for Monday, sat at the top, and beneath it, while I was still holding the phone, a new message arrived. The little gray bubble blooming onto the screen before I could stop it. Priya wants 15 minutes before the 9 a.m. Wants your sign-off on next steps, Re. Callahan, V. 3 separate complaints now, not 2. Can talk tonight if you're free? I stood very still, with the phone half shielded against my ribs, my thumb hovering over the notification, my heart doing something quick and unfamiliar in my chest. Callahan, V. There is more than one Callahan in this world, I told myself. Even as some quieter part of me already knew there was only one Callahan whose file would land on Priya's desk, with 3 separate complaints attached. 3 separate voices from 3 separate corners of the company who did not know each other and did not know me and had no reason to lie. I looked up. Across the tent, under string lights that had cost, I would guess, another few $1,000s to install for one night, Vanessa was laughing at something Trent had said, her head thrown back, champagne catching the light, utterly certain of the room she was standing in and every person's place inside it, including mine. I put the phone face down against my thigh, the screen dark, the message unanswered, and I smiled at Daniel across the tent like nothing at all had just landed in my hand. But something had. And for the first time all night, the plan I'd walked in with, watch, don't perform, just see how they treat a poor person, started to feel very small next to the one forming behind it. I stepped outside for air, past the tent flap, out onto the gravel path that circled the vineyard's reflecting pond, and for a minute the party noise dropped to a hum behind me. That's when the memory came, uninvited, the kind that surfaces easiest when your chest is already tight and looking for somewhere to put the pressure. 12 years ago, before I was anyone's CEO and before I was anyone's wife, I was a 29-year-old woman moving out of a 1-bedroom apartment in University City with everything I owned packed into 11 cardboard boxes and a laundry basket. And Vanessa Callahan, 19 at the time, still in community college, still years from becoming the woman with the ice swans, showed up on a Saturday morning with a rented U-Haul because Daniel had a work trip he couldn't move, and I didn't know a single other person in that city yet. She carried boxes for 6 hours. She made fun of how many books I owned. She stopped at a gas station and bought us both terrible coffee and sat on my new front step drinking it, legs stretched out, and told me, unprompted, that she was glad her brother had found someone who didn't need saving. I remember that phrase specifically because I turned it over for weeks afterward, grateful for it, a 19-year-old girl's blessing that meant more to me than most adult approval I'd gotten in my life. That same year, at Thanksgiving, Judith made a comment about my background, a polite word for the fact that I'd grown up in a rented duplex with a mother who cleaned offices at night. And it was Vanessa, 18 months younger than me, and still a teenager by most measures, who cut her mother off at the table and said, "Mom, enough," in a voice that didn't leave room for a follow-up. Nobody at that table forgot it. I certainly didn't. For years afterward, I thought of Vanessa as the one person in that family who'd seen me clearly before I'd built anything worth seeing. I don't know exactly when it curdled. I've tried to trace it, the way you trace a water stain back to the crack that caused it, and I can't find one single moment. Maybe it was the year Daniel and I bought our first house and Vanessa was still renting. Maybe it was watching Daniel and me build something steady and quiet while her own relationships kept collapsing loudly, one after another, each new failure narrated to the family with more detail than the last. Maybe it was simpler than any of that. Maybe it was just that the girl who once said she was glad I didn't need saving grew into a woman who needed, very badly, for someone else to need saving. And I had stopped being available for the part. There was a year, my fourth in the marriage, when Vanessa was between jobs and between apartments at the same time, and she stayed with Daniel and me for 11 weeks. I never once brought it up afterward, not to her, not to Judith, not even really to Daniel, because I didn't want it to sound like a debt I was collecting on. I made her lunch most days. I helped her rewrite a resume that had, at the time, exactly one job on it. I sat with her at our kitchen table the night before, an interview she was sure she'd fail, and told her, echoing the exact words she'd once said to me, that she didn't need saving either. She got that job. It was an entry-level logistics coordinator role at a small regional company that, within a year, would become large enough to need a real HR department, a real compliance office, a real chief of staff, a company she has worked at for 4 years now without once asking who actually signs the checks at the top of it. I hadn't thought about that kitchen table in years. Standing by the reflecting pond, I thought about it for a long time. Whatever it was, by the time we got the invitation to this party, Vanessa hadn't defended me at a family dinner in at least 6 years. She'd started them instead. Small ones first. Comments about my clothes, my car, my hobbies, said with a smile so nobody could call it cruelty out loud. Then bigger ones. Then this. An entire party built, I understood now. Standing by that reflecting pond with the memory of gas station coffee still warm somewhere in my chest, at least partly around the pleasure of being seen as more than me. I went back inside because the air had gotten cool and because Daniel would start looking for me if I stayed gone too long. On my way back through the tent, I passed the catering staff's staging table, half hidden behind a fabric partition, where a young server, 19, maybe 20, with a name tag that said Miguel, was refilling a tray of stuffed mushrooms when Vanessa swept past and told him, without slowing down, that the shrimp tower was already looking sad and he needed to fix it before people notice. Her voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't kind either. The exact register of someone who has learned that cruelty delivered quietly reads as competence instead of what it is. Miguel said, "Yes, ma'am," to her retreating back, and kept refilling the mushroom tray with hands that had gone very steady, in the specific way hands go steady when a person is used to being spoken to like that and has decided not to let it show. I watched that exchange longer than I needed to. I thought about the girl on my front step with terrible gas station coffee, glad her brother had found someone who didn't need saving. And I thought about the woman 20 feet away dismissing a 19-year-old server like he was furniture that had started to squeak. And I understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with anger, that whatever I'd once loved about Vanessa hadn't been erased so much as it had simply stopped being convenient for her to keep. I could have said something. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to tell this story as though I had no choice at any point along the way, and that isn't true. I could have walked over to Miguel and told him his tray looked fine. I could have found Vanessa and quietly mentioned that I'd noticed how she spoke to the staff. I could have, at any point that whole evening, simply said the 2 words that would have ended the entire performance. I'm the CEO. And watched the room rearrange itself around me in real time. Watched every glass lower an inch. Watched Vanessa's smile do whatever a smile does when it has to reassemble itself from scratch in front of an audience. I didn't. Not out of cowardice, and not, I told myself, out of cruelty either. I stood near that partition a moment longer, watching Miguel's steady hands, and I made a decision that would matter a great deal more than I understood in that instant. I wasn't going to correct anyone. Not yet. If this family wanted to show me exactly what they thought I was worth when they believed no one important was watching, I was going to let them finish the sentence. All of it, every last word. I had no way of knowing, standing there with my club soda gone warm and flat in my hand, that the sentence was about to be finished for me, and that it would arrive 20 minutes later in a car none of them would be able to laugh off. I found a quiet spot behind the valet stand, past the string lights, where the gravel gave way to grass, and the party noise dropped to something I could think through. Then I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, same as always. That phone might as well live in his hand. "Hey," he said. "Sorry to text you tonight. I know it's the weekend." "It's fine," I said. "Tell me." He didn't ask why my voice sounded tighter than usual. That's one of the things I trust about Marcus Reyes. 11 years my chief of staff, hired back when I still answered my own phones. A man who has never once asked me a personal question he didn't need the answer to for work. "Priya pulled the full file this afternoon," he said. "It's not just conduct anymore. There's a third complaint from a warehouse supervisor in the Gastonia yard. Says Callahan took credit for a safety fix he implemented himself, then dressed him down in front of his crew when he pushed back. That's separate from the 2 HR already had on file about her undermining direct reports." "Okay," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "What does Priya want from me before Monday?" There was a pause, the kind Marcus takes when he's deciding how much to say on the phone versus in person. "There's one more thing," he said. "Priya's audit team flagged an expense report Callahan submitted Thursday. Client relationship development Q3, $18,400. It fell under the threshold, so it went through in the same batch as everything else. Your office approved it without a second look, same as 300 other line items that week. But the vendor name on the invoice is Ashworth Estate Catering and Events, and the date on it is tonight." I stood very still in the dark grass behind the valet stand, the distant thump of the DJ's bass reaching me through the ground more than the air, and did not say anything for a long moment. "Elena?" Marcus said. "I'm here," I said. "Say that again." He said it again, slower, like he understood without my explaining that something about it had landed somewhere he couldn't see. $18,400, Ashworth Estate, tonight. My company, the one I'd built out of a 2-desk office over a tire shop, the one whose payroll I'd once run out of a shoebox before I could afford software for it, had, without my knowledge, helped pay for the party where a room full of people were laughing at my Honda. "I need everything Priya has by Monday morning," I said, once I trusted my voice again. "The complaints, the expense report, the original approval chain, all of it. And I need to see the physical file tonight, not a summary. Can you get it to me?" "I can bring it myself," Marcus said. "I'm actually not far. I was already planning to swing by your place tonight with the board deck for Tuesday. Figured I'd drop the Callahan file at the same time so you'd have it first thing. Where should I meet you?" I told him I was at a family event, gave him the address without thinking too hard about what it would mean for those two facts to occupy the same physical space, and told him not to make a scene, just to text when he was close and I'd meet him at the gate. He said okay, said he'd take the S-Class, and then paused and said actually, the S-Class was in the shop, he'd take the Bentley instead, the car we keep for airport pickups when a client's flying in and the optics matter, the only car in our small fleet that isn't a rental sedan or a delivery van with the company logo on the side. I told him that was fine. I did not think, in that moment, about what a Bentley pulling up to a party, built partly around mocking my Honda, might look like to the people standing in that tent. I was thinking about $18,400, and a girl who once sat on my front step with terrible gas station coffee. I stood behind the valet stand a moment longer after the call ended, turning the phone over in my hand, watching the small blue light of the screen fade to black. This is why I love making these stories. People think silence means weakness until the proof is already in the room. Stay with me. We're right at that point. Turning the phone over in my hand, watching the small blue light of the screen fade to black. 11 years I had kept those two names apart. Elena Whitfield, who signed things, and Lena Callahan, who showed up to family dinners in a cardigan and let people finish sentences about her without correcting them. I had built that separation the way you build a load-bearing wall, carefully, on purpose, because I liked having one room in my life where nobody wanted anything from me and nobody measured me against a balance sheet. Standing in the dark grass, I understood that the wall had a crack in it now, and the crack had a dollar amount attached, and there was no way to unknow either one. I thought, briefly, about calling Marcus back and telling him to turn around, to bring the file to the house instead, to keep the two halves of my life apart for one more night, same as I had for the 11 years before it. I even had my thumb over his contact for a second. But I didn't call. Some decisions get made in your body before your mind finishes arguing about them. And mine had already been made the moment I heard the words Ashworth Estate out of Marcus's mouth. I put the phone in my cardigan pocket, the one with room enough for a phone, and, apparently, an entire second identity, and I went back inside because I didn't know what else to do with my body. The party had shifted into its later, looser phase. The DJ had people dancing now. Trent had his tie loosened and draped over one shoulder like a trophy. And Vanessa was holding court near the bar with a fresh glass of champagne, telling a story I could tell from 20 feet away was about herself. I found Daniel near the edge of the dance floor and told him I needed 5 minutes of air, and he searched my face with the particular look he gets when he knows something's wrong and knows better than to ask about it in public. "You okay?" he said quietly. "I will be," I told him, which was true, though not in the way he understood it yet. I watched Vanessa a while longer from across the tent. She'd pulled her phone back out, showing the bonus email to a new cluster of guests. Her voice pitched to Carrie, corporate finally recognizing real talent. And I thought about the warehouse supervisor in Gastonia, whose safety fig she'd apparently claimed as her own, a man I'd never met, whose name was now sitting in a file Marcus was driving toward me at that very moment. I thought about $18,400 of client relationship funds spent on ice swans that were, even now, slowly losing their shape in the July heat. That's when I heard it. A shift in the noise near the entrance. A ripple moving backward through the crowd. The specific hush that spreads when something unexpected arrives. Craig's voice, loud, delighted, calling toward the valet stand. "Whoa, somebody's got money." Heads turned. The DJ, sensing an audience shift, actually lowered the volume a notch. Through the gap in the tent flap, I could see headlights sweeping slow and deliberate up the gravel drive, catching the ice swans, catching the string lights, catching 200 faces all turning at once toward a car that had absolutely nothing in common with a 200,000-mile Honda Civic. The Bentley came to a stop at the edge of the gravel circle, headlights sweeping once across the tent before the driver cut the engine, and for a moment, the only sound was the DJ's bass, still thumping under 200 people who had all, in the space of about 4 seconds, stopped what they were doing to look. Marcus got out in a gray suit, no tie, carrying a slim leather folder under one arm, the way he carries every important document, like it weighs more than paper should. He is not a large man. He is not flashy. He wears the same 3 suits in rotation and drives a 12-year-old pickup on weekends because, he's told me more than once, appearances are for the client-facing hours only. But a man stepping out of a Bentley at a party built on the premise that a certain family's poor relation had nothing worth noticing draws a particular kind of attention regardless of what he's wearing. And I watched that attention ripple backward through the crowd exactly the way I'd expected it to. "Who is that?" I heard someone say. Not to me. To the air. To whoever might answer first. Marcus scanned the tent quickly, methodically. The same habit he brings to any unfamiliar room. And found me within about 3 seconds, because Marcus has spent 11 years learning to find me in a crowd. He crossed the gravel and then the grass, folder still under his arm, and stopped a respectful distance away, exactly as he does at the office when other people are in the room and the moment calls for it. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, and his voice carried further than he probably meant it to, because the DJ had cut the music down to almost nothing, and half the tent had gone quiet trying to listen. "I know it's a Saturday. Priya wanted this in your hands tonight, instead of waiting for the 9 a.m. He held out the folder. The Callahan file, full complaint history, the Gastonia statement, and the expense report flag from the audit team. She'll need your sign-off on next steps before the board update Tuesday." He said it exactly the way I would have wanted him to say it. Flat, professional, entirely uninterested in the fact that he'd just said the words CEO's office in front of 150 strangers, because in his mind, he was simply doing his job for the person who runs the company. He had no idea, standing there in the grass in his gray suit, that the name on that file and the family standing 20 feet away were about to collide in front of him. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, and took the folder. Somewhere behind me, I heard the specific, singular sound of a champagne glass leaving someone's hand and meeting stone. I turned. Vanessa stood frozen by the ice swans, her hand still curved in the shape it had held the glass in, champagne pooling dark against the pale stone at her feet, her face doing something I had genuinely never seen it do before. Not confusion exactly, more like the particular blankness of a person watching two pictures that shouldn't fit together try to occupy the same frame at once. "Marcus," she said, and her voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Marcus Reyes?" He looked at her, then at me, then back at her, and I watched him do the math almost as fast as I'd done mine 2 hours earlier by the shrimp tower. "Vanessa?" he said carefully. "I didn't realize this was—" He stopped himself, glanced at me, and I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. Permission to keep going, because there was no version of this where the sentence stayed unfinished now. "You work for her," Vanessa said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes moved from Marcus to me and back, and I watched something behind them try, frantically, to rearrange 11 years of assumptions in real time. "You work for Lena." "I work for Elena Whitfield," Marcus said, gently. The tone of someone correcting a person he can tell is already standing on ground that just gave way. "CEO of Whitfield Logistics." The tent had gone almost completely silent by then, except for the low bass line nobody had bothered to shut off, thumping along underneath a 200-person hush like a heartbeat nobody had asked for. Craig, still holding a beer he'd forgotten to drink from, looked between the Bentley and me and said, to no one in particular, "Wait, Whitfield Logistics? That's who Vanessa works for." "I know," I said. It was the first thing I'd said out loud since Marcus arrived, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steadier than I felt. "I own it. I've owned it for 11 years. Judith's hand found the back of a chair. Trent's mouth opened and then closed without producing a sound, which was, I would reflect later, the single most useful thing he did all evening. Daniel didn't move at all. He stood beside me, very still. And when I glanced at him, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. Not surprise, because he'd always known, but something closer to relief, like a held breath finally let go. Vanessa found her voice before anyone else did, which didn't surprise me. "That's not," she started, then stopped, then tried again, louder. "The way you raise your volume when the logic underneath you has stopped holding weight. You don't even dress like you drive a Honda. You told everyone tonight you keep busy. You let me—" She stopped herself again, and I watched her realize in real time, exactly what she was about to admit to a tent full of witnesses. That she'd spent the evening mocking a woman for supposedly having nothing, in a party her own company had unknowingly helped pay for. "I let you talk," I said, and I kept my voice level. Kept it quiet enough that people had to lean in slightly to catch it, because I have learned, across 11 years of boardrooms, that volume is what people reach for when they don't have anything else, and I had something else. "I wasn't hiding anything from you tonight that I don't hide from this whole family, every day, on purpose. I like having one room in my life where nobody wants anything from me. Tonight I wanted to see what that room actually looked like when the people in it thought no one important was watching." I held up the folder Marcus had handed me, not to threaten her with it, just to acknowledge that it existed. "This isn't about tonight, Vanessa. This has been sitting on my desk since before the invitations went out. I just didn't know it had your name on it until about 40 minutes ago." I watched her eyes drop to the folder and then come back up to my face. And for the first time, in longer than I could remember, I watched Vanessa Callahan not have anything to say at all. Near the catering table, half hidden behind the fabric partition, I caught sight of Miguel. Tray, forgotten in his hands, watching the whole scene with an expression he was trying very hard to keep neutral, and mostly succeeding. Our eyes met for half a second. I didn't smile. But something passed between us anyway. The particular, quiet understanding of two people who'd both spent the evening being underestimated by the same room for very different reasons, and who both now understood exactly how much that underestimation had been worth. "We'll talk Monday," I told Vanessa. And I meant it as fact, not as a threat, though I understood how it would land as both. 9 a.m. at Priya's office. Bring whatever you need to bring. Then I turned to Marcus, thanked him again, told him I'd walk him back to the car, and left the tent behind me. The music still cut low, the ice swans still slowly dissolving, 200 people already turning to each other to whisper the same 4 words in 100 different tones of disbelief. "She's the CEO." Monday morning, I drove the Honda to work, same as always, and parked it in the same spot I've parked in for 11 years. Not the reserved space up front with my name stenciled on it, but 3 rows back, near the recycling dumpsters, because I'd claimed that spot my first year in business, when I couldn't afford to waste a good parking space on symbolism, and I'd never bothered to move. Dana was at the front desk when I walked in at 8:40, headset on, already halfway through her first call of the day. She raised a hand and mouthed, "Good morning, Ms. Whitfield," without breaking stride in the conversation she was having. Same as every single morning. Same as all 340 employees at Whitfield Logistics, because to them, I have never been anything other than exactly who I am. I said good morning back. It struck me, walking past her desk toward the elevator, how strange it was that this ordinary exchange, a receptionist saying my actual name to my actual face, had felt 48 hours earlier like the single most dangerous thing that could happen to me. On the way up, I passed Marcus in the hallway, folderless this time, coffee in hand, and he asked, carefully, how the rest of the weekend had gone. I told him the truth, that it had gone about as badly as it possibly could have for the family and about as well as it possibly could have for me, and that both of those things were somehow true at the same time. He didn't push for more. That's another thing I trust about him. Priya was already in her office when I got upstairs, the Callahan file open on her desk, 3 tabs marking 3 separate sections. I sat across from her for exactly the amount of time it took to say what I needed to say. "I want to be clear about my role here," I told her. "I'm recusing myself from this decision. You run the investigation, you make the call, and if the file supports termination, HR terminates, not me. I don't want anyone in this building 5 years from now wondering whether Vanessa Callahan lost her job because she made fun of my car at a party." Priya, who has run HR for me for 6 years and has never once needed me to explain myself twice, nodded and said that was exactly how she'd planned to run it anyway. The complaints stand on their own, she said. 3 corroborated statements, independent of each other, going back 14 months. And the expense report is in a gray area. She coded a personal engagement party as client relationship development. That's not a judgment call. That's misuse of funds on paper, with her signature on the request. She paused. I'll have a recommendation by Wednesday. I left her office and didn't ask again. I found out what happened the way I find out about most personnel matters in a company this size now, through a short, factual email 3 days later, informing me that an employee had been separated from the company following a substantiated policy violation. No name attached, because that's the process I built, on purpose, so that even I would have to learn about it the same way everyone else did. I didn't need the name. I already knew it. Vanessa called Daniel twice that week, not me. I don't know everything that was said, and I didn't ask for a transcript, but I know the calls were shorter than she's used to family calls being. And I know that somewhere in the second one, she asked him whether I'd done this on purpose, engineered the whole thing, the party, the reveal, the file, all of it, as some kind of elaborate setup. Daniel told her the truth, which was that I hadn't planned a single part of it except the cardigan. The rest had simply been sitting there, waiting, the way consequences do, for the moment 2 separate lives stopped being separate. Judith called a week after that, and her voice on the phone was different than I'd heard it in years. Not warm exactly. Judith isn't built for warm, but careful. The specific carefulness of someone recalculating a person's worth in real time and not entirely liking what the math had cost her in advance. She asked whether I'd be at Thanksgiving. I told her I would, same as every year, and that I hoped everyone there would be ready to have dinner with the actual person sitting at the table, not the one they'd been more comfortable imagining. She didn't have much to say to that. I let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to. Cordelia sent a text a few days after that, Trent's cousin from the Shrimp Tower conversation, asking if we could grab coffee sometime, a request that would never have occurred to her 3 weeks earlier, and that I felt no particular urge to accept. I didn't answer it unkindly. I just didn't answer it at all, which felt, for the first time in a long time, like a complete sentence on its own. Daniel and I talked properly 2 nights after the party, sitting on the back steps of our house with 2 cups of coffee that had gone lukewarm before either of us remembered to drink them. He apologized for not stepping in sooner at the party, for the years of small comments he'd let slide past both of us because keeping the peace had always felt easier than correcting the record. I told him I hadn't wanted him to fight my battles for me. I'd built an entire company proving I didn't need anyone to do that, but that I did want, going forward, for our home to stop being the one place where I had to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. He said that was fair. He said it like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying without noticing the weight of it for a long time. I still drive the Honda. I still keep the cardigan, the same one, a little more worn now than it was the night Vanessa made fun of it, hanging on the hook by our back door next to my keys. And, these days, next to the laminated employee badge I used to leave locked in a desk drawer at the office so it would never accidentally end up in a pocket that walked into a family dinner. I don't hide the 2 halves of my life from each other anymore, not because hiding them failed. It worked exactly as well as I'd built it to work for 11 quiet years, but because I no longer see the point in a wall that only exists to protect other people from having to see the whole of me at once. 2 weeks after the party, I drove out to Ashworth Estate on a weekday afternoon alone to settle the last of the vendor invoices personally instead of routing them through the usual channels. A small, deliberate correction, the kind only I would ever notice. The ice swans were long gone by then. The tent had come down. It was just a green field with a reflecting pond and a gravel drive. Quiet in the ordinary way most places are quiet once the performance has ended, and only the truth of a place is left standing in it. I sat in the Honda in the empty lot for a few minutes before driving home, no one watching, no one deciding anything about me based on what they saw, And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that silence felt like something I'd actually chosen, instead of something I'd had to survive. I'm Clara, and this is my channel. I love making these stories and sharing them with people across the world. If this one found you at the right time, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.